Picture yourself floating back through time, drifting like a soft cloud over ancient India. The sun sets over stone palaces. Candles flicker in dark rooms. Long ago, before loud wars and bright battles, there lived another kind of warrior. These warriors wore no armor. They carried no swords. They moved like whispers through crowded streets. They hid in plain sight, watching, listening, remembering everything. They were the shadow agents, the invisible hands that shaped kingdoms. Tonight, let your mind rest as we walk slowly through their hidden world. Breathe deeply. Relax your shoulders. We will discover how quiet voices broke mighty empires from within, how a whisper could topple a throne, how shadows became more powerful than armies. Close your eyes if you wish. Let the story carry you gently into the past, where secrets changed history and silence spoke louder than steel. First whispers in stone halls. Imagine the oldest forts in India, built when the world was young. These stone walls held more than soldiers. They held secrets carved into their very hearts. Long before anyone wrote books, people scratched symbols into palace stone. These marks looked like simple pictures: a bird, a flower, a cup. But they meant something else entirely. Only special people could read them. These were the first secret messages. When a king wanted to send private words to his general, he could not shout them across the land. Everyone would hear. So clever minds invented hidden writing. They put messages where others saw only decoration. The practice began in the Indus Valley, over 4,000 years ago. Ancient builders left marks on bricks. Some marks showed who made the brick. Other marks said something different, something only a few understood. As centuries passed, kingdoms grew bigger. Kings ruled lands so vast they could not visit every corner. They needed eyes everywhere. They needed ears in distant cities. So they trained special messengers. These messengers learned to hide words inside innocent objects. A clay pot might carry grain on the outside and secrets on the inside. A merchant's cart looked ordinary, but beneath the vegetables lay coded letters. The meaning of these early systems was simple but powerful. Information became treasure. The king who knew his enemy's plans could win without fighting. The ruler who learnt about problems early could fix them before disaster struck. Secret writing protected the kingdom like invisible armor. It let rulers reach across mountains and rivers with their thoughts. Every symbol carved in stone represented trust. The person who carved it trusted the person who would read it. Both trusted that enemies would see only meaningless scratches. What these ancient codes show us is something important about human nature. People have always needed privacy. Kings and queens, merchants and farmers, everyone had thoughts they wanted to share with some, but hide from others. The desire for secrecy did not make people bad. It made them careful. It made them smart. These first hidden messages in stone halls taught later generations how to protect valuable knowledge. The techniques spread from kingdom to kingdom, growing more sophisticated with each passing century. What started as simple pictures evolved into complex ciphers that could hide entire conversations. Think about the connection between then and now. Those ancient symbol carvers were the great-great-great-grandparents of all spies who came after them. Every secret agent in history learned from those first whispers in stone. The methods changed, but the purpose stayed the same. Protect what matters. Share knowledge only with those who need it. Move information without anyone noticing. Rest now with this thought. Somewhere, in an old fort, a mark on stone still guards its secret. The person who carved it is dust. The king who ordered it is forgotten, but the whisper remains, patient and silent, waiting in the stone. Cities that held secrets. Old cities in India were like living organisms. They breathed with thousands of people moving through narrow streets. Merchants sold spices, priests chanted prayers, children played in dusty corners. But woven invisibly through this busy life, moved another layer of people. These were the watchers. They looked like everyone else. A fruit seller who noticed which noble bought what. A temple sweeper who heard whispered conversations. A traveling musician who carried messages in his songs. These ordinary-seeming people formed the first spy networks. They were the city's secret nervous system, carrying information from every corner back to one central mind. The earliest organized networks appeared during the Mauryan Empire, around 300 years before the Common Era. Emperor Chandragupta Maurya understood something vital. A king sitting in his palace knew only what people told him. If those people lied, the king made bad decisions. If enemies plotted against him, he needed to know before they struck. So, Chandragupta created a system. He recruited people from every walk of life, servants in enemy homes, merchants who traveled between kingdoms, even wandering holy men who everyone trusted. These agents reported back through careful chains of contact, each person knowing only the one above and below them. Cities needed these hidden eyes for survival. Imagine a kingdom as a giant body. The king was the head, making decisions, but the head cannot see its own feet. It cannot feel a thorn in its heel until the pain travels up. Spies were like nerves, sending signals of danger before the damage spread. They warned of corrupt officials stealing taxes. They discovered plots to poison the water supply. They learned when enemy kingdoms planned invasion. Without this invisible network, cities remained vulnerable, unaware of threats until too late. The web beneath daily life was intricate and beautiful in its complexity. A spy in one city might report to a handler who worked as a merchant. That merchant traveled to another city, where he passed information to a temple priest. The priest encoded the message in a religious verse and taught it to a traveling storyteller. The storyteller sang the verse in the capital, where the king's spy master recognized the code. Information flowed like underground rivers, invisible on the surface, but powerful below. This system protected kingdoms for hundreds of years. The genius of ancient Indian espionage was its invisibility. Unlike armies that everyone could see, spy networks existed in gaps and shadows. They turned ordinary social structures into intelligence tools. Every conversation became potential information. Every traveler was a possible messenger. The system was self-sustaining because it ran on normal human behavior. People naturally gossip, observe, and share stories. The spy network simply directed those natural impulses towards strategic purposes. Consider how this links to what we learned before. Remember those symbols carved in stone? Now those symbols traveled through human carriers instead of staying fixed in walls. The cities became living libraries of secrets, with thousands of people as moving pages. Rest with this image. A busy marketplace centuries ago, people buying bread and cloth, and among them, invisible and patient, the watchers who knew everything and revealed nothing. Sacred texts of silent war. India's ancient wisdom lived in books, not the kind you find in stores today, but scrolls made from palm leaves, bound with thread, kept in special boxes. Among these old texts sat one remarkable book called the Arthashastra. The name means science of wealth, but it taught much more. It explained how to run a kingdom, how to collect taxes, how to keep people happy. And hidden in its chapters, like seeds in fruit, lay detailed instructions for espionage. This book treated spying as a normal part of good government, like building roads or training soldiers. The author believed knowledge was power, and secret knowledge was supreme power. The man who wrote this extraordinary manual was called Chanakya, also known as Kautilya. He lived around 2,300 years ago. History remembers him as a brilliant teacher and strategist. He helped establish the Mauryan Empire by advising its founder. But Chanakya understood something others missed. Battles were expensive and destructive. Why destroy what you want to conquer? Better to infiltrate, to learn secrets, to turn enemies into friends, or make them fight each other. His book described different types of spies. Some were wandering monks, others were housewives, merchants, students. Each type had special skills and purposes. Together, they formed a complete system of intelligence gathering. What the old book taught about secrets was revolutionary for its time. Chanakya wrote that a king should have spies, watching spies. Even trusted advisors needed observation, because power corrupts. The book described how to plant false information to confuse enemies, how to recognize when someone was lying, how to protect secrets using codes and multiple messengers. It explained that the best spy was someone nobody suspected. A beggar could enter any neighborhood. A merchant could ask questions anywhere. The book turned everyday social roles into strategic advantages. It showed rulers how to build networks that looked invisible but functioned perfectly. The philosophy of invisible conflict shaped Indian political thought for centuries. Chanakya believed that open warfare was the last resort of stupid rulers. Smart rulers won through intelligence, through knowing more than their opponents. He wrote that a wise king should be like a heron, patient and still, watching carefully, striking precisely when the moment arrived. This philosophy spread through Indian kingdoms. Rulers studied the Arthashastra, like modern generals study military strategy. They understood that the empire with better information usually won, regardless of army size. Knowledge became the ultimate weapon. These ancient teachings survived because they worked. Kingdoms that followed Chanakya's advice lasted longer. Their rulers avoided disasters by learning of dangers early. They won wars without fighting by knowing enemy weaknesses. The book influenced not just Indian rulers, but spread along trade routes. Scholars in Persia, China, and Southeast Asia studied similar concepts. The idea that intelligence work was a legitimate tool of governance became accepted across much of Asia. Modern intelligence agencies, though they use different tools, follow principles Chanakya described thousands of years ago. Notice how this connects to our earlier stories. Those symbols in stone walls and those watchers in city streets followed methods that Chanakya wrote down. He gave structure to ancient practices, turning scattered techniques into a comprehensive system. Let this wisdom settle in your mind. An old book written on leaves that crumbled to dust contained secrets that still echo through corridors of power today. Knowledge preserved becomes knowledge multiplied. Objects left by ghost hands. The tools of ancient spies were simple but clever. They did not have computers or cameras. They used what they could touch and carry. A hollow walking stick might hide a rolled message. A ring with a rotating stone could mark secret symbols in wax. A trader's scale that weighed spices could also weigh precious information when adjusted in special ways. These objects looked innocent to casual observers. Nobody suspected the flute player's instrument contained coded instructions. Nobody imagined the clay oil lamp had a false bottom holding tiny letters. The genius lay in ordinariness. The best spy tool was the one that nobody noticed was a tool at all. Through Indian history, the variety of concealment devices grew impressively. Archaeologists have found hollow coins that could carry messages rolled tight as threads. Special sandals had compartments in the heels. Jewelry boxes had secret drawers, activated by pressing decorations in the right sequence. Holy men carried prayer beads where certain beads unscrewed to reveal cavities. Women's bangles sometimes featured tiny hinges invisible except to trained eyes. Every culture and profession developed its own specific tools. What a merchant needed differed from what a soldier required. A priest's tools were different from a dancer's, but all shared the same principle. Hide the important inside the ordinary. How small things carried big secrets depended on human psychology. People see what they expect to see. A traveling merchant with trade goods seems normal. Nobody searches every grain of rice in his cart. A musician with instruments belongs in that role. Nobody examines the inside of a drum. Spies understood this mental shortcut. They exploited the way human attention works. By appearing completely normal, completely boring, they became invisible. The secret message mattered far more than the object carrying it. But without the right object, the message never reached its destination safely. The power of everyday items came from their universal presence. In ancient India, thousands of merchants traveled trade routes daily. Countless musicians performed at festivals. Holy men wandered freely across borders that armies could not cross. Each of these normal people could potentially be a messenger. Enemies could not search everyone without paralyzing normal life. So the system worked on volume and normalcy. Most travelers were genuine, but mixed among them moved those carrying secrets. Finding them was like finding one special grain of sand on a beach. These techniques shaped modern espionage in surprising ways. Today's spies still use similar concepts. They call it tradecraft. The tools changed from hollow sticks to digital encryption, but the principle remained identical. Conceal what matters inside what seems harmless. Make the observer look elsewhere. Use everyday objects in unexpected ways. When you learn about historical spy tools, you see the roots of every espionage technique used today. The minds that invented hollow rings and false bottom lamps were thinking exactly like modern intelligence officers. Only the technology differed. Remember our earlier lessons about cities and networks. Those tools connected the system. The watcher in the marketplace used these objects to send information to the merchant, who used different objects to pass it to the priest, creating an unbroken chain. Imagine holding something simple right now. A cup, a pen, a stone. Could it hold a secret? Ancient spies made ordinary items extraordinary. That transformation was their art. Empires built on whispers. Great empires rise and fall like seasons. Some are remembered for mighty armies, others for magnificent temples. But the truly powerful empires understood something deeper. They knew that information built stronger foundations than stone. The Mauryan Empire, which controlled most of India from 322 to 185 BCE, mastered this truth. Emperor Chandragupta and his grandson Ashoka ruled vast territories. How did they maintain control over lands so enormous that it took months to travel from one end to another? They built an empire within an empire, an invisible kingdom of spies and informers that kept the visible kingdom stable. Under the Mauryan dynasty, the spy network became a formal government institution. The empire divided into provinces, each with a governor. But alongside visible officials moved shadow officials. These secret agents reported directly to the capital, bypassing the governors they watched. If a governor became corrupt, stealing taxes, or plotting rebellion, the emperor knew before the governor suspected anyone noticed. This system of checks and balances maintained order across impossible distances. The emperor's eyes and ears reached everywhere. No corrupt official could hide. No conspiracy could grow large before detection. The whispers traveling through the shadow network kept the visible empire honest. Hidden networks beneath golden thrones operated with beautiful efficiency. The Gupta Empire, which flourished from 320 to 550 CE, refined Mauryan techniques further. They added layers of redundancy. Multiple spies in the same city reported through different channels. If one chain of communication broke, others continued functioning. The Guptas also pioneered the use of false information. They deliberately fed incorrect reports to test loyalty. An official who leaked a false secret revealed himself as untrustworthy. The empire learned not just what happened, but who could be trusted. This internal quality control made the Gupta intelligence system remarkably reliable for its era. How whispers built what armies could not becomes clear when comparing empires. The Gupta period is called India's Golden Age. Science, art, mathematics, and literature flourished. Why? Because the empire was stable. Stability came from good governance. Good governance required good information. The spy networks provided that information. When farmers struggled, the emperor knew early and sent relief. When bandits threatened trade routes, authorities responded quickly. When foreign kingdoms planned invasion, defensive preparations began months in advance. All this responsiveness depended on rapid, accurate intelligence flowing through the shadow network. Peace and prosperity grew from invisible roots. The quiet foundation of power explains why some empires lasted centuries while others collapsed within decades. Military strength alone could not sustain an empire. Strong armies could conquer territory but not govern it. Real power came from knowing what happened in every village, every city, every noble's house. The Mauryan and Gupta empires understood this lesson. They invested as much in intelligence networks as in military forces, perhaps more. An army deters external enemies. An intelligence service protects against internal decay. Together, they created empires that history remembers as golden ages, times when civilization reached heights not seen again for centuries. This connects directly to what we learned about Chanakya's teachings. His book described the system. The empires implemented it. Theory became practice. Those carved symbols, city watchers, and spy tools all came together in service of something larger. Picture a magnificent palace at night. Inside, an emperor sits with reports from 1,000 sources. Outside, his empire sleeps peacefully, protected by warriors no one sees. Myths that hide truth. Indian mythology overflows with stories. Gods who change shape, heroes who disguise themselves, demons who trick with illusions. On the surface, these seem like entertainment, fairy tales to teach moral lessons. But look closer and patterns emerge. Many popular legends describe exactly what spies do. Shape-shifting represents changing identities. Disguises allow infiltration. Tricks and illusions confuse enemies. The myths were not just stories. They were teaching tools, ways to pass down spycraft through generations in forms that everyone could remember. A child hearing about the god Vishnu taking different forms learned that identity was flexible. That lesson had practical applications. One famous story tells of the goddess Durga defeating demons that armies could not stop. She achieved victory through strategy and deception as much as strength. Another tale describes Krishna advising the Pandavas during war, using intelligence and cunning to overcome superior forces. These myths celebrated cleverness over brute power. They taught that the smart warrior thought before acting, that preparation mattered more than size, that knowing your enemy was half the battle. Folk tales about invisible protectors watching over villages echoed the reality of rural spy networks. Stories of shape-shifting animals entering palaces reflected how spies infiltrated secure locations. The mythology encoded real techniques in memorable narratives. What mythology reveals about shadow work is profound. Ancient peoples understood something modern societies sometimes forget. The line between truth and story blurs easily. Every legend contains some historical reality. Every historical account includes some storytelling. Spies operated in exactly this blurry zone. Their real identities were hidden behind false stories. Their actual missions were disguised as ordinary activities. They lived between truth and fiction, making both serve their purposes. The myths taught this flexibility of identity. They showed that a person could be multiple things simultaneously: a wandering holy man, and an intelligence gatherer, a traveling dancer and a messenger. Both true, neither complete. Truth wrapped in wonder made lessons memorable. Try remembering a list of spy techniques. Now try forgetting a story about a clever hero outwitting enemies. Stories stick in memory where facts fade. Ancient teachers knew this. They encoded practical knowledge in mythological form because myths lasted. Children learned these stories and grew up understanding that disguise worked, that observation mattered, that clever thinking beat strong fighting. The lessons entered their minds as entertainment. Later, some of those children grew into adults who needed exactly that knowledge. The myth had prepared them without them realizing it. These stories also served another purpose. They provided cover for actual operations. If everyone knew tales about invisible watchers and disguised agents, then real spies seemed like myth. When someone whispered about seeing a suspicious stranger, others laughed. "That is just like the old stories," they said. The legends made people dismiss reality as fantasy. This protective confusion benefited intelligence networks. Operating in plain sight became possible because people expected spies to be dramatic and obvious, like in myths. Real agents being ordinary and boring seemed impossible by comparison. Remember how earlier chapters described networks in cities and empires. Those systems needed cultural support. Myths provided that support, creating a society that understood and accepted the necessity of secret work, even while remaining largely unaware of its true extent. Close your eyes and imagine a grandmother telling stories to children by firelight, tales of clever heroes and mysterious guardians, and woven through every word, lessons that would protect kingdoms. When far lands met in darkness, India never existed in isolation. The Silk Road connected east and west like veins carrying blood. Merchants traveled from Persia bringing carpets and stories. Chinese traders arrived with silk and tea. Arab sailors landed on western coasts with spices and news. Along with goods and stories moved something else: spies. Every major empire maintained agents in foreign lands. These operatives watched trade, observed military strength, and assessed political stability. When a Persian spy arrived in an Indian city, he might encounter a Chinese agent in the same marketplace. Sometimes they knew about each other, sometimes they did not. But their invisible dance shaped international relations as much as any treaty or war. The methods of Persian intelligence services were famous for sophistication. They used official diplomats as intelligence gatherers. When Persian ambassadors visited Indian courts, they were honored guests. But while negotiating treaties, they noted army sizes, weapons quality, and economic conditions. Their gifts to Indian rulers included beautiful objects with hidden purposes. A decorative mirror might have unusual properties that helped remember details. A jeweled box might feature measuring devices disguised as ornaments. Persian spies excelled at gathering information openly, hiding observation within acceptable social interactions. Indian counterparts learned from these techniques, adopting and adapting them. Chinese intelligence networks operated differently. They emphasized patient, long-term cultivation of sources. A Chinese agent might live in India for decades, becoming part of the local community. He married locally, learned languages perfectly, raised children. Only after years of establishing trust would he begin careful information gathering. This method produced incredibly reliable intelligence, but required enormous patience. Chinese handlers understood that some investments took generations to mature. They played a longer game than most rivals. Indian spies encountering these deep-cover Chinese agents sometimes never realized they were agents at all. International shadow diplomacy became an art form. When empires wanted to communicate secretly, they used back channels that no official record mentioned. A merchant might carry a personal letter from one king to another. A Buddhist monk traveling between India and China might deliver verbal messages memorized exactly. These informal communications allowed rulers to negotiate without committing to formal positions. If talks failed, neither side lost face because officially no talks happened. This shadow diplomacy prevented many wars and facilitated countless agreements that history never recorded. The intelligence networks that supported trade also carried these crucial but invisible negotiations. Connected webs across continents grew naturally from trade relationships. Every merchant needed reliable information about conditions in distant markets. Every traveler wanted knowledge about safe routes. These practical needs created information networks that functioned similarly to spy networks. The line between commercial intelligence and political espionage blurred easily. A trader reporting on harvest conditions also noticed troop movements. A pilgrim describing religious sites mentioned fortification quality. The overlap meant that intelligence flowed constantly along trade routes, creating an international information market where knowledge was bought and sold alongside silk and spices. Think back to our early chapters about city networks and imperial systems. Now expand that picture. Those networks connected not just within India, but linked to Persia, China, Southeast Asia, creating a vast web-spanning continents. Rest with this thought: two spies from different empires sharing tea in a caravanserai. They speak different languages, but understand each other perfectly. Both know the game, both play it well. Neither mentions what they really do. Star patterns over battlefields. Ancient Indians loved the night sky. They watched stars with scientific precision, mapping their movements, predicting eclipses, creating accurate calendars. This astronomical knowledge was not just academic. It had practical military applications. Generals planned campaigns around lunar cycles. New moon meant dark nights, perfect for surprise attacks. Full moon allowed night marches, but also revealed troop movements to enemies. Certain star patterns indicated seasons when mountain passes became navigable or when rivers flooded. Intelligence officers who understood astronomy could predict when enemies might attack based on celestial conditions. The sky became a strategic map that anyone could read if they knew how. Indian astronomers developed sophisticated techniques for timekeeping and navigation. They calculated the length of days across the year with impressive accuracy. They understood that stars visible from one location differed from those visible elsewhere. This knowledge helped spies determine their position when traveling in unfamiliar territory. Before compasses or GPS, stars provided the only reliable navigation at night. An agent traveling through enemy territory could orient himself by Polaris and other fixed stars. Astronomical tables told him what time it was by observing which constellations were visible. This technical knowledge made the difference between successful missions and agents who never returned. Predicting movements by celestial signs gave strategic advantages that seem almost magical today. Historical records describe generals consulting astronomers before major battles. The astronomers advised when to attack based on planetary positions and star patterns. This sounds like superstition, but contained practical wisdom. Enemy generals consulted the same signs. By knowing what astrological advice the enemy received, Indian commanders predicted enemy actions. If Persian astrologers favored attacking during Mars ascendants, Indian defenders prepared for attacks during those periods. The system worked because everyone used similar astronomical frameworks. Understanding those frameworks meant understanding enemy thinking. The sky as a strategic map extended beyond military applications. Spies used astronomical knowledge for precise timing of operations. If an agent needed to meet a contact at a specific time but had no clock, they used star positions. The rising of certain constellations marked hours as reliably as any timepiece. Different regions had different astronomical traditions, so a spy familiar with multiple systems could operate effectively across cultural boundaries. An agent who spoke Persian, understood Chinese star names, and knew Indian astronomical calculations could coordinate activities across 3 empires. This technical expertise made certain spies invaluable. Science in shadow operations became increasingly important as kingdoms grew more sophisticated. The division between astronomy, mathematics, navigation, and intelligence work blurred. Many of India's greatest astronomers served dual roles. They advanced scientific understanding while advising rulers on strategic matters. Their calculations determined auspicious dates for treaties and optimal times for military campaigns. They trained agents in practical astronomy and navigation. The observatories they built served both pure research and intelligence purposes. From those towers, astronomers could observe distant landscapes as well as distant stars. Recall our earlier discussion of empires built on whispers. Those whispers required coordination. Agents needed to synchronize meetings across vast distances. Astronomical timing made that coordination possible before mechanical clocks existed. Imagine an ancient agent alone in desert darkness. He looks up at familiar stars. They tell him he is on schedule, heading the right direction, and his contact will arrive in 2 hours. The sky guards and guides him. The hidden force of informers. Every empire needs farmers to grow food and soldiers to fight wars. But the Mughal Empire, which dominated India from 1526 to 1857, understood they needed something else. They needed ordinary people who watched and listened. The Mughals created an information network so thorough that historians still study it with amazement. This system did not rely on professional spies alone. Instead, it turned everyday citizens into the empire's eyes and ears. A farmer reported when strangers passed through his village. A shopkeeper noticed who bought unusual amounts of supplies. A priest overheard confessions that revealed plots. Together, these casual observers formed a web that caught everything. Merchants became particularly valuable intelligence assets. They traveled constantly for trade, visiting cities and villages throughout the empire and beyond its borders. A merchant naturally asked questions about prices, harvests, and local conditions. Nobody suspected when he also noticed military preparations or political tensions. Mughal administrators cultivated relationships with merchant guilds. They granted special trading privileges in exchange for regular reports. The arrangement benefited everyone. Merchants gained protection and advantages. The empire gained constant updates from every corner of its territory. The information flowed both directions naturally, embedded in normal commercial relationships. Priests held unique positions of trust. People confided things to religious figures they would tell no one else. In temples, mosques, and churches, priests heard confessions, counseled troubled souls, and mediated disputes. They saw community dynamics that remained hidden from official view. Some priests served the empire willingly, believing stable government served religious interests. Others were recruited through careful persuasion or pressure. The Mughals understood that spiritual authority provided access to information no amount of torture could extract. A priest who heard about a planned rebellion in confession could warn authorities without revealing his source. The confiding person never knew their secret had been compromised. Wandering ascetics presented perfect cover for intelligence gathering. India had thousands of holy men who travelled constantly, depending on charity, welcome everywhere. A sadhu entering a village attracted no suspicion. He might stay days or weeks, observing everything while appearing to meditate. People spoke freely around holy men, assuming them above worldly concerns. Some sadhus genuinely were spiritual seekers, but mixed among them moved agents trained in observation and memory. These wandering spies could cross borders that armies could not. They entered regions where Mughal authority was weak, but where problems might be brewing. Their reports provided early warning of rebellions, famines, and invasions. Society as surveillance system sounds sinister to modern ears, but in its context, the system provided stability. The Mughal Empire at its peak brought unprecedented peace and prosperity to India. Part of that success came from responsive governance. When problems emerged, authorities knew quickly and acted. The informer network was not primarily about catching criminals. It was about maintaining situational awareness across impossible distances. The empire could only govern effectively if it knew what was happening. In an age without telephones or internet, human networks were the only option. Trust and betrayal intertwined inseparably in this system. People informed on neighbors for various reasons. Some served from loyalty to the empire, others gained advantages through cooperation. Many had mixed motives, both genuine and calculated. The system created social tensions that sometimes erupted into violence when informers were discovered. Yet it also created bonds when the information helped communities. If a spy reported an approaching famine, authorities could send relief. The network could harm or help, depending on how it was used. Remember those earlier chapters about cities holding secrets and empires built on whispers. The Mughal system represented the culmination of centuries of refinement. Every technique we discussed earlier came together in their information empire. Picture a village square centuries ago. People buying and selling, talking and laughing. And woven invisibly through normal life, the watchers who kept the empire informed. Some wore saffron robes. Some wore merchant silk. Some looked like anyone else. The hidden force that held everything together, where truth meets legend. History and mythology blend together over time. A real event becomes a story. The story gains magical elements. Eventually, truth and legend become so tangled that separating them requires archaeological precision. India's espionage history contains many such blended tales. One famous example involves a woman named Nur Jahan, who married Mughal Emperor Jahangir in 1611. Historical records confirm she was politically brilliant, effectively ruling the empire when her husband's health failed. But legends grew around her intelligence network. Stories claimed she had spies in every household, that she could discover any secret, that her network extended into enemy kingdoms. Some of these claims were certainly exaggerated, but investigations by modern historians suggest many were true. The legendary spy queen was also a real political operator who used information masterfully. Famous cases that became folklore often started with genuine events. During the Maratha Empire, stories circulated about a dancer named Mastani who supposedly gathered intelligence at royal courts. The official histories barely mention her, but folk tales describe elaborate espionage operations. Recent scholarship discovered tax records and letters suggesting Mastani was indeed more than a dancer. She appears to have managed an information network that fed crucial intelligence to Maratha commanders. Over time, people added dramatic elements to her story. But the core seems factual. She was a skilled operator whose work remained secret during her lifetime and legendary after her death. The woman spy who saved a kingdom represents a recurring theme in Indian history. Multiple cultures tell similar stories about female agents who prevented disasters. One common tale involves a courtesan who learned about a planned palace coup. She warned the rightful ruler, who escaped assassination and regained power. The story appears in different regions with different names and details. This suggests either one original event that spread across India or multiple similar events that merged into a composite legend. Either way, the stories reflect a historical reality. Women had access to spaces men could not enter. They could gather information that male spies missed. Many kingdoms employed women in intelligence roles, though official records rarely mentioned this explicitly. How history becomes story follows predictable patterns. Real events that seem dramatic get retold. Each retelling adds small changes. A spy who recruited 10 informers becomes a spy who controlled hundreds. An intelligence success that took months becomes an overnight triumph. A network that required years to build appears to emerge instantly. These exaggerations do not mean the original events were false. They mean humans naturally amplify and simplify when telling stories. The basic facts often remain accurate even when the details grow fantastic. Historians must carefully separate the probable core from the later additions. Memory's transformation of fact serves important purposes. Legends preserve knowledge that written records miss. Official histories often ignored intelligence operations for security reasons, but people remembered important events and passed them down through stories. These folk memories sometimes provide the only evidence that certain operations occurred. Modern researchers compare legends against archaeological finds, foreign records, and documents discovered in archives. Surprisingly often, the legendary version contains substantial truth. The fictional elements usually cluster around specific details, while the broad outline remains accurate. The relationship between myth and reality in espionage work was always complex. Spies benefited from legendary reputations. If everyone believed Nur Jahan's network could discover any secret, people were afraid to plot against her. Fear based on reputation was as effective as fear based on reality, and much cheaper to maintain. But legends also created vulnerabilities. Enemies knew about famous spy networks and took precautions. The most successful intelligence operations were probably the ones that never became legendary, that remained completely secret. Link this to our previous discussions about myths that hide truth and the shadow networks of empires. Now we see how those concepts merged over time. Real operations inspired myths. Myths shaped how later operations functioned. Truth and legend became partners in the great game. Rest with this question. When you hear an old story about clever spies and dramatic secrets, what part is truth? What part is legend? Does it matter if the lesson remains valuable? Lines across centuries. Imagine drawing a line from Chanakya in 300 BCE to Shivaji Maharaj in 1650 CE, then extending it to British intelligence officers in 1850 CE. That line spans over 2,000 years. Remarkably, intelligence techniques remained consistent across this enormous time period. The tools changed from clay tablets to paper to telegraphs, but the fundamental methods stayed almost identical. Recruit informers from all social classes, use multiple layers to protect sources, verify information through independent channels, plant false intelligence to test loyalty. These principles appeared in Chanakya's ancient manual and in British intelligence handbooks 2 millennia later. The continuity reveals something profound about human nature and the nature of information itself. Each era learned from the last through a combination of written records and oral tradition. The Arthashastra survived as a text that Indian rulers studied for centuries. When new kingdoms rose, their advisors read the old manual and adapted its wisdom. The Mughal court maintained royal libraries containing historical texts about statecraft. Young nobles trained for government service studied these materials. They learned how earlier empires organized intelligence networks and applied similar structures. Some techniques were explicitly copied. Others emerged independently because the same problems produced similar solutions. Geography, human psychology, and political dynamics created consistent challenges that rewarded consistent solutions. The specific methods passed through generations changed in form, but not in function. Ancient spies used codes carved in stone. Medieval spies used invisible ink. British spies used telegraphic codes. All three accomplished the same goal: hiding messages from unintended readers. The technology advanced, but the principle remained constant. Similarly, ancient networks used runners to carry messages. Medieval networks used riders on horseback. British networks used trains and telegraphs. The speed increased dramatically, but the basic system of relaying information through secure channels persisted. New tools enhanced old methods without replacing the fundamental logic behind them. Maratha intelligence networks in the 17th and 18th centuries demonstrated direct continuity with much older systems. Shivaji Maharaj, who founded the Maratha Empire, consciously studied historical examples. His intelligence chief organized networks following patterns described in ancient texts. Shivaji employed women as agents, used merchants as informers, and maintained multiple verification systems. He could have learned these techniques directly from the Arthashastra, but by his time, such methods had become traditional knowledge passed through generations of Indian rulers. The wisdom had embedded itself in political culture. Anyone trained in statecraft absorbed these principles naturally. The unchanged nature of secrets explains the continuity. Human beings today have the same cognitive capabilities as humans 2,000 years ago. We think the same way, fear the same things, and make similar mistakes. Information has always been valuable. Secrets have always needed protection. The people who want secrets and the people who guard them engage in an eternal competition that technology affects but does not fundamentally alter. A spy in ancient Rome and a spy in modern Moscow face similar challenges, recruit similar types of sources, and use psychologically similar manipulation techniques. The surface details differ enormously, but the underlying dynamics remain constant. Human constants through time include curiosity, greed, loyalty, betrayal, fear, and courage. Intelligence work manipulates these unchanging aspects of psychology. A handler recruits an informer today using the same emotional appeals that worked in Chanakya's time. Offer money to the greedy, protection to the fearful, revenge to the wronged, purpose to the idealistic. These motivations have not changed across centuries or cultures. Every intelligence service, ancient or modern, Indian or foreign, Eastern or Western, works with the same raw materials of human nature. That explains why techniques persist. They persist because people persist in being fundamentally similar across vast stretches of time. Think about all our previous chapters. We started with symbols in stone, moved through empires and myths, encountered legendary figures. Now we see the connecting thread. The same wisdom ran through everything, sometimes hidden, sometimes obvious, always present. Imagine a river flowing through centuries. The landscape changes completely. Mountains erode, forests grow, cities rise and fall. But the river continues, sometimes underground, sometimes visible, carrying the same essential waters from ancient sources to distant futures. What the patterns reveal: when historians study how empires fall, they notice patterns. The collapse rarely comes from outside invasion alone. More often, internal decay weakens the empire until external pressure finishes what internal problems started. Intelligence failures contribute significantly to this decay. 3 major Indian empires demonstrate this pattern with remarkable clarity. The late Mauryan Empire, the Delhi Sultanate, and the Mughal Empire all followed similar paths to decline. Each maintained sophisticated intelligence networks during their peak. Each saw those networks deteriorate. The deterioration preceded collapse by years or decades, providing clear warning that contemporary observers somehow missed. Recognizing recurring historical rhythms requires looking beyond surface events. Battles and treaties fill history books, but underneath visible events, information systems either functioned or failed. When the Mauryan Empire weakened in the 2nd century BCE, historical records show increasing corruption among officials. Governors stole tax money. Army commanders sold military positions. This corruption was possible only because the intelligence networks that once detected such behavior had broken down. Emperors no longer knew what happened in distant provinces. By the time problems became obvious, fixing them required more power than weakened emperors possessed. The pattern repeated in later empires with eerie similarity. The Delhi Sultanate provides detailed examples because better records survived. During the reign of Alauddin Khilji in the early 1300s, intelligence networks functioned exceptionally well. Khilji maintained such thorough surveillance that historians called his reign oppressive. But it was also stable and prosperous. He knew about problems immediately and acted decisively. His successors gradually let the networks decay. They kept fewer informers. They ignored reports that contradicted their assumptions. They promoted loyal advisors over competent ones. Within 50 years of Khilji's death, the Sultanate had fragmented. Regional governors declared independence because central authority had become blind and weak. The empire still had armies, but lacked the information needed to use them effectively. 3 empires, 3 similar falls. The late Mughal period shows the pattern most clearly because it overlapped with British documentation. In 1700, the Mughal Empire was the world's largest economy and most powerful military force. By 1850, it had become a British puppet. What happened? The intelligence networks collapsed. Emperors stopped reading reports. Court politics became more important than governing. Informers were neither paid nor protected, so networks dissolved. Meanwhile, the British East India Company built extensive intelligence systems. They knew about every Indian court's internal politics, every noble's financial problems, every military commander's weaknesses. When the British moved against Indian rulers, they did so with perfect information. The Indians, blind to what was coming, fell one by one. The anatomy of internal decay always includes intelligence failure. Corruption thrives when watchers stop watching. Inefficiency grows when nobody measures performance. Threats multiply when warning systems break. The pattern is so consistent that it becomes predictable. An empire with failing intelligence networks will fall within a generation, regardless of military strength or economic resources. Information is the immune system of political bodies. When it fails, infections that a healthy system would easily defeat become fatal. Understanding this pattern should make modern governments invest heavily in intelligence capabilities. Some do. Others repeat the mistakes of history. Predictable paths of power exist because human organizations follow similar life cycles. Young organizations are lean and alert. They must be to survive. As they succeed and grow wealthy, bureaucracy increases. Connections matter more than competence. Leaders become isolated from reality. The organization becomes rigid and blind. These dynamics affected ancient empires and modern corporations equally. Intelligence networks suffer the same organizational aging. Early networks are small, efficient, and directly connected to decision makers. Mature networks become bloated, political, and ignored by leaders who prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. Recognizing this pattern allows intervention. The question is whether leaders have the wisdom and courage to act on the patterns history reveals. Consider how this analysis connects to everything we have explored. Those stone symbols, city watchers, empire networks, legendary operators all functioned perfectly until they stopped functioning. When networks failed, empires followed. Think about fallen towers crumbling into dust. They look like enemy armies destroyed them. But often the collapse started inside, with stones loosened by neglect, foundations weakened by ignored warnings. structures undermined by systems that stopped working before anyone noticed. Drawing the web of connections. Intelligence networks resemble spider webs. A spider sits at the center, feeling vibrations from every strand. When something touches the web anywhere, the spider knows instantly. Ancient Indian intelligence systems worked similarly. Handlers sat at network centers, receiving information from dozens of sources. Each source connected to multiple subsources, creating redundancy and verification. If one strand broke, others carried the information. If one source lied, others revealed the truth. The architecture was beautiful in its complexity and efficiency. Modern intelligence theorists study these ancient networks to understand principles that still apply today. Mapping invisible relationships requires thinking in networks rather than hierarchies. A pyramid-shaped organization has clear levels. Orders flow down, reports flow up. But intelligence networks formed webs with multiple connection points. A merchant might report to both a military handler and a court official. A temple priest might feed information to 3 different networks without knowing about the others. This redundancy prevented single points of failure. If authorities arrested one handler, the sources continued reporting through alternative channels. The system was self-healing. Break any single strand, and the web remained functional. Only systematic destruction of multiple nodes could cripple it. During the Maratha Empire under the Peshwas in the 1700s, the network reached extraordinary sophistication. Historical records describe individual agents handling 15 to 20 sources each. Those sources maintained their own subnetworks of casual informers. A single network might involve 300 people across 3 layers. Yet most participants knew only their immediate contacts. Security through compartmentalization protected the system. If the enemy captured a low-level informer, that person could betray only their handler, not the entire network. The handler could then be sacrificed or warned to flee, while the rest of the network continued operating. This architecture demonstrated principles that modern intelligence services rediscovered centuries later. How one agent led to 10 more reveals the recruitment dynamics. A successful informer gained the handler's trust. The handler then asked the informer to suggest friends or associates who might also help. Recruitment through personal relationships produced more reliable agents than cold approaches to strangers. If Vijay vouched for Rajan, and Rajan for Amit, and Amit for Deepak, a web of mutual obligation formed. Each person had incentive to ensure the others performed well. If one person betrayed the network, their entire friend group suffered consequences. This social pressure maintained operational security far more effectively than fear alone. People might lie to authority figures but hesitated to betray friends. Network theory in ancient times was not called network theory. Ancient Indians did not use modern terminology, but they understood the principles intuitively. They knew that distributed systems were more resilient than centralized ones. They recognized that multiple weak connections could achieve what single strong connections could not. They grasped that information wanted to flow, and that smart design let it flow usefully rather than chaotically. These insights emerged from practical experience rather than abstract theory. The networks evolved through trial and error over centuries. What worked survived. What failed disappeared. The systems that the British encountered in the 1700s represented the accumulated wisdom of 2,000 years of experimentation. The architecture of influence that these networks created shaped politics invisibly. A noble might believe he made decisions independently, but his barber mentioned something. His mistress expressed concern. His merchant friend reported worrying news. His priest offered counsel. Each input seemed individual, but together they steered his thinking. If an intelligence service wanted that noble to support a particular policy, they did not confront him directly. They fed coordinated information through multiple channels he trusted. The noble reached the desired conclusion, believing it was his own idea. This was manipulation at its most sophisticated, influence without apparent influencer. Remember our discussion of empires built on whispers and the hidden force of informers. Now visualize how those elements connected. The whispers traveled along strands of human relationship, creating webs that caught everything. Picture a spider web covered in morning dew. Each drop of water represents a person. Sunlight makes the whole web visible for a moment before the dew evaporates and the web disappears back into invisibility. Still present, still functional, just unseen. Ancient shadows in modern light. Walk into any modern intelligence agency headquarters and you will find sophisticated technology. Satellites photograph enemy territory. Computers analyze massive data. Encrypted communications link agents worldwide. But underneath the technology, the fundamental methods remain remarkably similar to ancient techniques. Modern case officers recruit sources using the same psychological principles Chanakya described. They compartmentalize operations exactly like medieval Indian networks. They verify information through multiple independent channels, a practice thousands of years old. Technology changed everything and nothing. The tools are unrecognizable, but the tradecraft is ancient. What still works from ancient manuals surprises modern practitioners. Indian intelligence manuals emphasized psychological profiling long before that term existed. They described how to identify recruitable individuals by observing behavior. Someone who talks too much reveals insecurity. Someone drowning in debt becomes vulnerable to financial recruitment. Someone nursing grudges against their employer might betray that employer. These insights are timeless. Modern recruitment protocols teach these same observations. The manuals also stressed the importance of understanding cultural contexts. An approach that works in one society fails in another. Successful intelligence work requires cultural intelligence as much as technical skill. Ancient Indian operators, working across diverse cultures, mastered this principle. Contemporary use of timeless tactics appears throughout modern intelligence work. The honey trap, where an attractive person seduces a target to gain information or compromise them, appears in the Arthashastra. The false flag operation, where you pretend to represent one group while actually serving another, was standard practice in medieval India. The use of blackmail, bribery, and ideological manipulation to recruit sources, all described in detail in ancient texts, remains the bread and butter of modern espionage. Intelligence services train their officers using case studies. Many of those cases, stripped of modern details, would be recognizable to Chanakya. The principles transcend time because they exploit consistent features of human psychology and social organization. Why human nature does not change provides the explanation for this continuity. Evolution works slowly. Human beings 10,000 years ago had the same cognitive architecture we possess today. We experience the same emotions, think in similar patterns, and make comparable mistakes. The environments changed dramatically, but the minds inhabiting those environments remained essentially constant. This means techniques that worked on humans 2,000 years ago still work today. People still respond to fear, greed, idealism, and ego. They still want to feel important, to be appreciated, to advance their interests. Intelligence work manipulates these universal human drives. Because the drives are universal and unchanging, techniques for manipulating them remain effective across centuries. Past as prologue is more than a poetic phrase. History shows us what humans do under various circumstances. By studying historical intelligence operations, modern practitioners learn what approaches work and what mistakes to avoid. Every failed operation in history teaches a lesson. Every success demonstrates a principle. When the CIA studies ancient Indian networks, they are not engaged in academic exercise. They are mining historical data for operationally relevant insights. Ancient Indians solved problems that modern agencies still face. Their solutions, adapted to contemporary technology and society, remain valuable. Studying the past does not mean copying it blindly. It means understanding why certain approaches succeeded and applying those underlying principles to current challenges. The relationship between ancient wisdom and modern practice continues evolving. As new technologies emerge, intelligence services adapt old methods to new mediums. Social media created new opportunities for surveillance that the Arthashastra could not anticipate. But the principle of observing people's behavior to understand their intentions is exactly what Chanakya taught. Cryptocurrency enables new forms of financial transaction. But the principle that tracking money reveals relationships and motives is ancient. Artificial intelligence analyzes patterns in data, but the principle of finding meaningful patterns in information chaos is what Indian intelligence networks did manually for millennia. Each new technology is layered over ancient foundations. Connect this back to our earlier exploration of networks across centuries. We saw continuity in methods. Now we understand why that continuity persists into the present. The techniques work because people work the same way across time. Imagine an ancient spy and a modern intelligence officer sitting together. They speak different languages and wear different clothes, but when they discuss their work, they understand each other perfectly. The tools differ, but the game remains the same. Both play at recognizing rules that never change. The first clear truth emerges. History often obscures details of intelligence operations. Spies work in shadows. Their successes remain classified. Their failures get blamed on others. But occasionally, enough evidence survives that historians can reconstruct what actually happened. One such case comes from 185 BCE, during the decline of the Mauryan Empire. Emperor Brihadratha ruled from Pataliputra, the imperial capital. He was the last Mauryan emperor, though he did not know it. His army commander, Pushyamitra Shunga, led the military forces. On the surface, their relationship appeared normal. The emperor commanded, the general obeyed. But beneath the surface, Pushyamitra was building a parallel power structure through careful intelligence work. The assassination plot of 185 BCE demonstrates sophisticated operational planning. Pushyamitra did not simply kill the emperor in a rage. He spent years preparing. First, he cultivated relationships with key military commanders. He offered them promotions and wealth in exchange for loyalty. He identified which commanders were frustrated with Brihadratha's leadership and exploited those grievances. Second, he placed informers in the imperial household. These agents reported on the emperor's movements, his mood, his plans. Pushyamitra knew more about the emperor than the emperor knew about himself. Third, he built support among religious authorities. The Mauryan dynasty had favored Buddhism. Pushyamitra, a Brahmin, promised to restore Hindu supremacy. This won him backing from powerful priests who influenced public opinion. Pushyamitra Shunga's infiltration of imperial structures took approximately 5 years. Historical inscriptions and later texts provide specific details. He first gained prominence around 190 BCE as a military commander. Between 190 and 185 BCE, he systematically undermined imperial authority. He ensured military pay came from him personally rather than the treasury, making soldiers loyal to him instead of the emperor. He delayed obeying imperial orders, testing how much insubordination he could risk. He spread rumors that Brihadratha was weak and ineffective. When he finally struck during a military parade in 185 BCE, killing Brihadratha publicly, nobody rose to defend the emperor. Every potential supporter had been either bought, intimidated, or marginalized. The assassination succeeded because the intelligence preparation was thorough. Internal betrayal as historical turning point cannot be overstated. The Mauryan Empire was the largest and most powerful state in Indian history to that point. Its collapse changed South Asian politics for centuries, but the empire did not fall to foreign invasion or economic crisis. It fell because one man, using intelligence networks and patient subversion, destroyed it from within. Pushyamitra founded the Shunga dynasty, which ruled for over a century. His success inspired imitators. Future Indian leaders studied his methods. The lesson was clear. Patient intelligence work could achieve what open warfare could not. This case influenced Indian political thinking for 2 millennia. Documentary evidence, inscriptions, and sources provide unusual detail about these events. The Puranas, ancient Indian texts, describe Pushyamitra's rise. Ashokavadana, a Buddhist text written a few centuries later, gives hostile but informative accounts. Archaeological inscriptions from Pushyamitra's reign reveal his propaganda. He presented himself as a legitimate ruler restoring righteous governance. Later historians, comparing multiple sources, reconstructed his operational methods. Modern scholars analyze these events as case studies in palace coups and intelligence-led regime change. The fact that we know so much about this operation, despite its ancient date, demonstrates how thoroughly Pushyamitra documented his own rise. Winners write history, and he made sure his version emphasized his cleverness rather than brute force. When proof replaces mystery, history moves from legend to fact. For centuries, scholars debated whether Pushyamitra's coup involved complex planning or simple military violence. Recent synthesis of evidence strongly supports the intelligence interpretation. He was not just a strong general. He was a skilled intelligence operator who understood that controlling information and relationships mattered more than controlling weapons. This shifts how we understand the Mauryan collapse. It was not inevitable decline. It was deliberate destruction executed by someone who mastered the art of shadow warfare. Reflect on how this concrete example illuminates everything we have discussed. Those abstract principles from ancient texts, those general descriptions of networks and methods, here they come together in one real, documented operation that changed history. Rest with this image. An emperor watching a military parade, surrounded by guards who have been turned, by an army that no longer serves him, moments from an assassination he does not see coming, all destroyed by whispers spoken years before. Eyes lifted to greater mysteries. Intelligence networks were not confined to individual kingdoms. They extended across the known world, following trade routes and pilgrimage paths. Medieval India was deeply connected to global networks. Indian merchants traded with Southeast Asia, China, the Middle East, and East Africa. Indian pilgrims traveled to holy sites in Tibet, Sri Lanka, and eventually to Mecca and Jerusalem. These travels were ostensibly religious or commercial, but embedded within them moved intelligence agents gathering information about foreign lands. A merchant observing port facilities in Java collected military intelligence. A pilgrim noting road conditions on the route to Lhasa provided strategic information. The geographic scope of medieval intelligence networks matched the geographic scope of Indian cultural influence, which extended from Afghanistan to Indonesia. Spies on pilgrimage routes demonstrate the genius of this system. Pilgrims were above suspicion. A devout Hindu traveling to Varanasi or Badrinath seemed innocent. A Muslim making Hajj to Mecca appeared pious. These journeys crossed multiple kingdoms and cultures. Pilgrims could ask questions anywhere without arousing suspicion. They could observe fortifications, count ships, assess economic conditions, all while appearing focused solely on spiritual matters. Medieval Indian kingdoms maintained agents among pilgrims to holy sites throughout Asia. Some were genuine believers who also served their kingdom. Others were intelligence professionals using pilgrimage as cover. The reports they sent back provided Indian rulers with detailed knowledge of distant regions. To Mecca, Tibet, and Southeast Asia flowed Indian travelers carrying both prayers and purposes. Historical records describe elaborate intelligence operations embedded in religious journeys. During the Chola Empire, which controlled South India from the 9th to 13th centuries, Indian merchants established settlements throughout Southeast Asia. These settlements served as trade bases but also as intelligence collection points. The merchants reported on political stability, military capabilities, and economic opportunities. Similarly, when Indian Buddhists pilgrimaged to Tibet, they observed Chinese influence in the region. When Indian Muslims traveled to Mecca, they noted Ottoman power and Arab politics. All this information flowed back to Indian courts, giving rulers knowledge of the broader world. Religion and espionage intertwined throughout medieval period. This bothers modern sensibilities, but made perfect sense in historical context. Religion was not separate from politics, it was deeply political. Religious authorities wielded enormous influence. Pilgrimage routes were highways of cultural exchange and political information. The people traveling them were naturally interested in foreign affairs. Intelligence services simply formalized and directed that natural curiosity. They did not corrupt religion, but recognized its political relevance. A priest who traveled widely returned with knowledge. Whether he shared that knowledge with religious or political authorities, or both, depended on circumstances. Often the categories overlapped. A king was also a religious patron. A religious leader was also a political advisor. Maps of agent movements reveal surprising geographic reach. Archaeologists and historians have reconstructed travel patterns by analyzing trade records, religious texts, and diplomatic correspondence. Indian intelligence networks covered an area from the Mediterranean to the Pacific Ocean. Agents operated in every major city along the Silk Road. They maintained presence in every significant port of the Indian Ocean trade network. This vast geography required sophisticated logistics. Information took months to travel from distant regions back to India. But the information came steadily, keeping Indian rulers informed about events across half the world. Primary sources documenting these networks survive in unexpected places. Chinese historical texts mention Indian traders asking suspiciously detailed questions. Arab chroniclers describe Indian pilgrims who seemed unusually interested in military matters. European travelers to medieval India noted the rulers' surprising knowledge of distant events. These foreign observations, combined with Indian records, show a consistent pattern. Medieval Indian kingdoms projected intelligence collection capabilities far beyond their borders. They understood that in an interconnected world, knowledge of distant events affected home interests. Events in China influenced silk prices in India. Political instability in the Middle East affected Indian Muslim communities. Southeast Asian politics determined whether trade routes were safe. To govern effectively at home required knowing what happened abroad. Consider how this expands our understanding. Earlier chapters focused on domestic networks. Now we see those networks extended globally, creating information systems that spanned continents. Imagine a map of medieval Asia. Draw lines connecting cities where Indian agents operated. The web covers thousands of miles, crossing deserts, mountains, oceans. Information flowed along those invisible lines like blood through veins, keeping the heart informed about distant extremities. History's soft circles turning. Examining multiple empire collapses reveals disturbing patterns. The same mistakes recur. The same vulnerabilities get exploited. The same warning signs get ignored. 3 major Indian empires fell to internal subversion, following remarkably similar trajectories. The Delhi Sultanate collapsed in 1526. The Vijayanagara Empire fell in 1565. The Mughal Empire lost power throughout the 1700s. Different centuries, different dynasties, different cultures. Yet the patterns of decline matched almost perfectly. In each case, external enemies succeeded primarily because internal betrayal weakened the empire first. In each case, intelligence failures enabled the betrayals. In each case, leadership ignored warnings until too late. Comparative analysis framework reveals 3 common phases. Phase 1 is network degradation. The intelligence systems that once functioned well begin failing. Informers go unpaid and stop reporting. Handlers become corrupt and fabricate reports. Leaders stop reading intelligence briefings. The organization becomes blind while still believing it can see. Phase 2 is elite capture. Foreign agents recruit or compromise key officials. A general takes bribes. A treasurer embezzles funds. A court advisor secretly serves an enemy. These betrayals remain undetected because the intelligence networks that should catch them have already failed. Phase 3 is sudden collapse. The accumulation of compromised officials and undetected threats reaches critical mass. When the external enemy finally attacks, the empire cannot respond effectively. Commands are not obeyed. Resources are not available. Coordination fails. The empire collapses not from external strength, but from internal hollowness. The Delhi Sultanate ended in 1526 when Babur defeated Ibrahim Lodi at the First Battle of Panipat, but the real defeat happened years earlier. Ibrahim Lodi was the 5th Sultan of the Lodi dynasty. His father had maintained effective intelligence networks. Ibrahim neglected them. He was suspicious and paranoid, but in counterproductive ways. He suspected loyal officers and ignored actual threats. His intelligence chief warned about Babur's invasion preparations. Ibrahim dismissed the warnings. Several nobles offered to betray Delhi for Babur's gold. Ibrahim did not know about these betrayals until too late. When the battle occurred, several of Ibrahim's commanders deliberately underperformed. His army outnumbered Babur's 3-1 but lost decisively. The military defeat was inevitable given the intelligence failures and internal betrayals that preceded it. Vijayanagara Empire met a similar fate in 1565 at the Battle of Talikota. The empire faced a coalition of Deccan sultanates. On paper, Vijayanagara should have won. It was wealthier and had a larger army. But 2 Muslim generals commanding Vijayanagara forces defected during battle, taking their troops with them. This defection turned the tide. Why did the empire employ generals of questionable loyalty in a crucial battle? Because the intelligence services that should have vetted them had become dysfunctional. Emperor Rama Raya was known for ignoring intelligence reports and making decisions based on court favorites' advice. His predecessors built Vijayanagara into South India's dominant power through careful intelligence work. He lost it through intelligence negligence. The battle destroyed the empire completely. The magnificent capital city was sacked and never recovered. Common elements in each collapse center on information failure. First, leadership isolation. Rulers surrounded themselves with flatterers who told them what they wanted to hear. Accurate but unpleasant reports were suppressed. Leaders made decisions based on false information. Second, corruption unpunished. When officials stole money or sold positions, the theft continued until it crippled administration. Third, external infiltration. Enemy agents recruited crucial personnel, while counterintelligence services failed to detect it. Fourth, ignored warnings. In every case, some officials warned about dangers. The warnings were dismissed as exaggeration or alarmism. Fifth, rapid collapse. The decay accumulated slowly over years or decades, but the final fall was sudden and shocking. Contemporaries were surprised by how quickly seemingly powerful empires disintegrated. Historical data reveals percentages that shock modern readers. At Talikota, the defection of approximately 30% of Vijayanagara's army in mid-battle guaranteed defeat. In the late Mughal period, historical estimates suggest that between 40 and 60% of high-ranking officials had been compromised by either the British East India Company or by regional powers seeking independence. These percentages did not happen overnight. They accumulated gradually as intelligence services failed to detect and counter enemy penetration operations. By the time leadership realized the extent of compromise, the empire was already lost. The Mughals formally ended in 1857, but had lost effective power decades earlier because their administrative structure had been hollowed out by systematic British intelligence operations. Chroniclers' accounts from these periods share a common theme. They express shock and confusion. How did we lose? We were so powerful. The enemies were so few. These laments appear in source after source. The chroniclers did not understand that visible power means nothing without the invisible systems that make it effective. An army requires intelligence to fight effectively. An administration requires oversight to function honestly. An empire requires awareness to detect threats. When those invisible systems fail, visible strength becomes irrelevant. The chroniclers saw military defeats. They missed the intelligence failures that made those defeats inevitable. Link this analysis to our earlier discussions of empires built on whispers and patterns across centuries. Now those abstract observations become concrete. We see exactly how intelligence failure translated into empire collapse, not once but repeatedly, following predictable patterns that careful observation could recognize. Picture 3 magnificent cities centuries apart: Delhi in 1526, Vijayanagara in 1565, Delhi again in 1857. Each at its height seemed invincible. Each fell suddenly to enemies who understood something the empires had forgotten. Information is infrastructure. When it crumbles, everything built upon it follows. Doors to hidden knowledge. For centuries, the British East India Company's intelligence operations in India remained classified secrets. The company presented itself as a trading organization. In reality, it functioned as an intelligence service that happened to trade. Modern historians gained access to company archives only in the 1900s, long after the events. What those archives revealed shocked scholars. The company maintained one of history's most sophisticated intelligence networks. They did not conquer India primarily through military superiority. They conquered it through information superiority. By the time British soldiers occupied Indian territories, the actual conquest had already happened through careful intelligence preparation that undermined Indian authority from within. Company archives reveal systematic infiltration spanning decades. The British approach was methodical and patient. They began operations in each new region by mapping power structures. Who holds authority? Who influences whom? What are the tensions between different factions? They recruited sources at every level of Indian society. A clerk in a Raja's court reported on policy discussions. A merchant in a noble's household noted financial difficulties. A priest in a temple reported on public sentiment. These sources were recruited through various means. Some were paid, others were blackmailed. Some genuinely believed British rule would benefit India. The diversity of recruitment techniques made the network resilient. If one approach failed, others succeeded. Robert Clive became legendary for his intelligence work in Bengal. In 1757, he faced a crisis. The Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, commanded an army of 50,000 soldiers. Clive had about 3,000 troops. direct military confrontation would have been suicide. Instead, Clive focused on intelligence operations. He identified key figures in the Nawab's court who were unhappy with Siraj's rule. He sent agents to cultivate relationships with these disaffected nobles. His primary target was Mir Jafar, the Nawab's military commander. Clive's agents approached Mir Jafar with a proposition: betray the Nawab at a crucial moment, and the British would make him the next Nawab. Mir Jafar, motivated by ambition and financial inducements, agreed. The Battle of Plassey in 1757 is typically described as a British military victory. That description is technically accurate but misleading. What happened at Plassey was not a real battle. It was a choreographed performance. When Clive's small force engaged the Nawab's massive army, Mir Jafar's troops, which formed a large portion of the Nawab's forces, remained stationary. They did not fight. The Nawab's artillery commander had also been bribed and fired his cannons harmlessly high. Only a small fraction of the Nawab's army actually fought the British. That fraction was quickly defeated. Siraj-ud-Dowlah fled the battlefield. He was captured and executed days later. Mir Jafar became the new Nawab, completely subservient to British interests. The British gained control of Bengal, the richest province in India, without a real military campaign. Intelligence work achieved what warfare could not have. How bribes and blackmail replaced battles defined the British approach throughout India. They refined this strategy over decades. Each success funded the next operation. The wealth extracted from Bengal paid for intelligence operations in other regions. The pattern repeated in the Carnatic, Mysore, Punjab, and eventually throughout India. British officers identified weak rulers, dissatisfied nobles, or ambitious commanders. They offered money, power, or both. The amounts were substantial by individual standards but trivial compared to the value of the territories gained. The British were buying empires at bargain prices through strategic corruption. Specific amounts paid sound almost comical in hindsight. Company records show payments to Mir Jafar and his associates totaling approximately £234,000 in 1757 currency. Adjusted for inflation and economic growth, this represents perhaps £100 million in current terms. In exchange, Britain gained control of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, territories with combined economic output worth billions in modern currency. Similar patterns appear throughout the archives. In Maharashtra, the British paid Maratha leaders perhaps £50,000 to betray Tipu Sultan. That relatively small investment helped defeat one of Britain's most dangerous Indian opponents. The British understood that corruption was not just cheaper than warfare, it was more effective. Defeating an enemy costs money and risks failure. Buying enemy leaders guarantees success at bargain rates. Names of Indian collaborators fill company documents. Some names became infamous. Mir Jafar's name, in Bengali, became synonymous with traitor. But hundreds of lesser-known collaborators enabled British conquest. Every region had nobles or officials who accepted British money. Some were motivated by greed, others faced blackmail. Some believed British rule was inevitable and wanted to be on the winning side. Some genuinely thought British governance would improve conditions. Whatever their motivations, they provided the British with crucial intelligence and active assistance. Their betrayals were often invisible to contemporaries. Only later did historians reconstructing events realize how extensively Indian authorities had been compromised. These paper trails transform our understanding of British imperialism. The traditional narrative suggests military superiority conquered India. The reality is more disturbing. British military technology was not dramatically superior to Indian capabilities. Indian rulers commanded larger armies. Indian territories had greater wealth. But Britain had superior intelligence capabilities. They understood their opponents better than opponents understood them. They systematically exploited that information advantage. The British Empire in India was not built primarily on battlefields. It was built in secret negotiations through bribed officials via blackmailed nobles. The empire of shadows preceded and enabled the visible empire. Connect this to everything we have learned. Those ancient techniques, those medieval networks, those timeless principles all came together in the British conquest. The British studied Indian history. They learned from Chanakya and Maratha intelligence systems. Then they used that knowledge against India itself. The student had learned too well. Imagine dusty archives in London, ledgers recording payments, letters describing operations, the entire conquest of India documented in meticulous bureaucratic detail. The empire was not conquered. It was purchased, one traitor at a time, with receipts filed in triplicate. The peaceful high point of understanding. The Sepoy Mutiny of 1857 represented a massive uprising against British rule. Indian soldiers called Sepoys, who served in the East India Company's armies, rebelled across northern India. They were joined by displaced rulers, disaffected nobles, and common people angry about British policies. The rebellion spread rapidly through major cities. For months, British control of India seemed in genuine danger. Delhi fell to the rebels. Kanpur witnessed fierce fighting. Lucknow was besieged. On the surface, this appeared to be a military conflict between British and Indian forces. But the decisive factor was not military, it was intelligence. The British won the mutiny because they knew what the rebels planned, while the rebels remained largely ignorant of British capabilities and intentions. Intelligence preparation before the rebellion gave the British crucial advantages. British intelligence officers had infiltrated Indian regiments years before the mutiny began. They maintained sources among sepoys, monitoring discontent levels. When religious rumours began spreading in 1856 about cartridges greased with pig and cow fat offending Muslim and Hindu sepoys, British intelligence reported growing anger. The reports were ignored by military leadership, but the intelligence infrastructure remained in place. When the rebellion erupted in May 1857, the British already had sources inside rebel camps. They knew which regiments would remain loyal, they knew which Indian princes would support the rebellion, and which would stay neutral or help the British. This advanced knowledge allowed strategic positioning of British forces. William Hodson exemplifies the intelligence operators who shaped the mutiny's outcome. Hodson commanded a cavalry unit called Hodson's Horse, but his real contribution was intelligence work. He ran an extensive spy network that penetrated rebel organizations in Delhi. His agents attended rebel meetings and reported plans back to British commanders. When the rebels planned attacks, Hodson knew in advance. He positioned his forces to counter rebel operations before they launched. His most famous operation was capturing the Mughal emperor's sons. Using intelligence about their location, he found them hiding in Humayun's tomb, arrested them, and later executed them. This brutal act eliminated potential rebel leadership. Hodson's network provided constant updates on rebel morale, supplies, and internal disputes. This information was military gold. Intercepted communications provided the British with perfect intelligence. The rebels used runners to carry messages between different cities and rebel commanders. British intelligence developed a systematic interception program. They identified common messenger routes and established checkpoints. Captured messengers were interrogated. Their messages were read, copied, and sometimes allowed to continue with modifications. The British practiced sophisticated deception operations. They sent false messages purporting to be from rebel leaders, creating confusion and mistrust. They forged letters ordering rebels to abandon strong positions or attack at disadvantageous times. The rebels, lacking similar intelligence capabilities, could not distinguish real orders from fake ones. Their command structure, already fragmented, became chaotic under this intelligence assault. Information superiority as decisive factor cannot be overstated. British forces were heavily outnumbered throughout the mutiny. Indian sepoys who rebelled outnumbered British soldiers by ratios of 5 or 10 to 1 in many locations. If this had been a straight military contest, the British should have lost. But war is not simple arithmetic. The side with better information wins even when outnumbered. British commanders knew where rebels were weak. They knew when rebel morale was low. They knew which attacks were feints and which were serious. This allowed efficient use of limited forces. British units moved to counter real threats while ignoring diversions. They attacked at moments of rebel weakness. They avoided engagements when rebel forces were concentrated. This level of operational efficiency was possible only through superior intelligence. Telegraph intercepts revolutionized intelligence work during the mutiny. The British had introduced telegraph lines in India starting in 1851. By 1857, telegraph connected major cities. The rebels understood telegraph was important and cut many lines. But the British maintained and repaired telegraph service in areas they controlled. This gave them communication speeds no messenger could match. British commanders coordinated operations across hundreds of miles in real time. More importantly, the telegraph allowed the British to intercept and decode rebel telegraphic communications. When the rebels occupied Delhi, they used the telegraph system there. British telegraph operators in nearby cities intercepted these messages. Some were in code, but British cryptographers broke most rebel codes within weeks. The rebels sent orders and status reports by telegraph, thinking them secure. British commanders read those same messages and planned accordingly. Decoded messages revealed rebel plans and capabilities. British archives contain hundreds of intercepted rebel telegrams. They show internal disputes among rebel leaders. They reveal chronic supply shortages. They document declining morale as months passed without decisive victory. British commanders reading these intercepts understood the rebellion was weaker than it appeared. While rebels held cities, they struggled to feed their soldiers and coordinate actions. British forces, though outnumbered, were better supplied and organized. The intelligence painted a picture of inevitable British victory, which influenced strategic decisions. Instead of negotiating or compromising, British leaders chose to crush the rebellion completely because intelligence told them they could. Casualty statistics demonstrate the intelligence advantage. Modern estimates suggest about 800,000 to 1 million Indians died in the mutiny and its aftermath. British military casualties were approximately 2,000 soldiers. This enormously disproportionate casualty ratio partly reflects superior British firepower, but it also reflects superior British intelligence. They avoided situations where they would take heavy casualties. They attacked when intelligence indicated success. They defended strong points that intelligence showed were strategically crucial. The rebels, fighting without comparable intelligence support, made many costly mistakes. They attacked fortified positions. They divided forces ineffectively. They failed to exploit opportunities because they did not know opportunities existed. The result was a one-sided conflict, despite numerical advantages favoring the rebels. Knowledge, as ultimate weapon, defines modern warfare and defined the mutiny. A well-informed force multiplies its effectiveness. An ignorant force wastes its strength. The British in 1857 had created what modern militaries call information dominance. They could see the battlefield completely while the rebels operated partially blind. This advantage proved insurmountable. No amount of courage or numbers could overcome it. The mutiny was crushed, not primarily through military brilliance, but through intelligence excellence. This lesson influenced military thinking worldwide. By the late 1800s, every major army was investing heavily in intelligence capabilities. They had learned from the British experience in India that information was as important as ammunition. Review our entire journey. We started with ancient symbols in stone. We explored city networks, empires built on whispers, techniques that spanned centuries. We saw those techniques culminate in the British conquest. Now we see their ultimate expression. In 1857, intelligence operations reached a sophistication that determined the fate of an entire subcontinent. The shadows had won their greatest victory. Picture the telegraph lines stretching across India, messages flowing through copper wires, British officers reading intercepted rebel communications. Each decoded telegram another advantage. Each piece of intelligence another brick in the wall that contained and eventually crushed the rebellion. The future belonged to those who controlled information. Gentle answers and one last question. The shadow warfare that shaped historical India did not end in 1857. When India gained independence in 1947, the new nation inherited more than territory and population. It inherited intelligence traditions 2,000 years old. The British had left behind a sophisticated intelligence apparatus. Indian leaders, trained in the same schools that taught British officers, understood intelligence importance. Within years, independent India created new intelligence agencies. The Intelligence Bureau, or IB, focused on internal security. Later, the Research and Analysis Wing, or RAW, handled external intelligence. These organizations built on foundations laid centuries earlier. They employed techniques Chanakya would recognize. They understood principles that Mughal spy masters knew. The shadow tradition continued, adapted to modern circumstances, but rooted in ancient soil. Formation of IB and RAW represented conscious continuity with historical practice. The founders studied Indian intelligence history. They examined what had worked for empires that succeeded and what failures destroyed empires that fell. They synthesized lessons from Mauryan networks, Mughal informer systems, and British colonial intelligence. The result was hybrid organizations that combined traditional Indian approaches with modern technology. RAW, founded in 1968, became one of the world's most capable intelligence services. It operated across South Asia and beyond, using techniques both ancient and contemporary. Human intelligence gathering remained central, as it always had, but now agents used electronic surveillance, satellite imagery, and computer analysis alongside traditional methods like recruitment and infiltration. Why the shadows never left relates to the fundamental nature of governance in diverse societies. India emerged from independence, fragmented by language, religion, caste, and region. Managing such diversity required information. The government needed to know what different communities thought, wanted, and planned. Intelligence services provided that awareness. They detected separatist movements early. They infiltrated criminal organizations. They monitored foreign interference. This work was not sinister, but practical. A government that does not know what happens within its borders cannot govern effectively. The intelligence services became part of the basic infrastructure of the Indian state. As necessary as roads or courts, methods showed remarkable continuity with the past. Modern Indian intelligence officers still recruit sources using approaches described in the Arthashastra. They exploit the same human motivations: greed, ego, ideology, and revenge. They compartmentalize operations to protect sources, exactly as medieval networks did. They verify information through multiple independent channels, a practice thousands of years old. They use commercial and religious cover for agents, just as Mauryan spies did. The technology changed completely. The psychology remained constant. A raw case officer, recruiting a source in Pakistan, uses techniques a Mughal intelligence handler would understand instantly. The meeting might involve encrypted phones instead of coded letters, but the human interaction is timeless. Modern parallels with historical practice extend to international operations. During the Cold War, India used its intelligence services to maintain strategic autonomy between American and Soviet blocs. RAW conducted operations in Pakistan, China, Sri Lanka, and elsewhere. These operations served national security, but also demonstrated continuity with historical traditions. Medieval Indian empires maintained intelligence networks throughout Asia. Modern India did the same. The geographic scope differed, but the concept remained identical. A powerful state needs to know what happens beyond its borders. India's intelligence reach in the late 20th century resembled Gupta or Mughal intelligence reach centuries earlier, adjusted for modern geography and technology. Ongoing influences appear throughout Indian strategic culture. The preference for covert operations over open confrontation reflects ancient tradition. Indian military doctrine emphasizes intelligence preparation before action. Indian diplomacy assumes that other nations conduct similar intelligence operations, creating a mutual awareness that shapes negotiations. India's nuclear deterrence strategy explicitly incorporates intelligence components, ensuring the nation knows about threats before they materialize. These approaches trace directly to historical experience. Centuries of shadow warfare taught Indian civilization that information matters as much as firepower. That lesson became embedded in institutional memory and continues shaping how modern India approaches national security. The intelligence services also serve domestic purposes that echo historical functions. IB monitors internal security threats ranging from terrorism to organized crime to political extremism. This role parallels the internal surveillance systems of ancient empires. The methods are more restrained and legally regulated than in Mauryan times, but the basic function remains similar. The government maintains awareness of what happens within its territory. This domestic intelligence work is controversial in democratic India, raising questions about privacy and civil liberties. Those tensions between security and freedom are not new. Indian political philosophy debated them even in ancient times. Chanakya's manual discussed how much surveillance was necessary versus excessive. Modern India continues grappling with those same questions. Consider the full arc of our journey. We began in ancient caves with scratched symbols. We moved through empires and networks, techniques and technologies, victories and defeats. We watched 2,000 years of shadow warfare shape a civilization. Now we see the endpoint is also a beginning. The shadow traditions that shaped history continue shaping the present and will likely shape the future. The story has no ending because intelligence work never ends. As long as nations compete, humans deceive, and information has value, the shadows will remain populated by those who watch and listen. Sleep now with this final question lingering. We have seen how shadows shaped empires, toppled kingdoms, and changed history, but perhaps the greatest secret is the simplest. What would human civilization look like if we needed no secrets? If every thought and plan were open? If trust required no verification? We cannot know. We have never lived in such a world. The shadows have always been with us. They likely always will be. That truth is neither good nor evil. It simply is, like the stars above, patient and endless. Breathe deeply now. Let your body sink into stillness. You have journeyed through 2,000 years of hidden history. You have walked with ancient spies and witnessed empires rise and fall. You have learned how whispers toppled thrones and how shadows shaped civilizations. This knowledge is yours now to carry into your dreams and beyond. If these stories brought you peace, if they eased your busy mind, perhaps share them with someone else who lies awake at night. History connects us all. The same stars that guided ancient agents shine above us tonight. The same human hearts that beat in Chandragupta's court beat in our chests. We are not so different from those who came before. Their struggles are our struggles. Their questions are our questions. Rest now in that continuity, that connection across time. Let history embrace you like a soft blanket. Let the ages whisper you to sleep. So we reach the end of our quiet journey. The shadows that move through this story still move through our world today. They are part of how civilization functions, neither purely good nor purely evil, simply necessary. The ancient spies we met, the empires they built and broke, the techniques they mastered, all remain relevant. Human nature has not changed. The game continues in new forms. But perhaps the most important lesson is this: power without knowledge is blind. Knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. The greatest intelligence operatives in history combine both. They knew secrets, but also knew when secrets mattered and when they did not. They served causes larger than themselves, whether we judge those causes right or wrong. Perhaps that service, that dedication to something beyond personal gain, is what made them memorable. Or perhaps they simply understood that information, like water, flows constantly. You can channel it, dam it, drink it, but you cannot stop it. It moves through human society as naturally as rivers move through valleys, shaping everything it touches. As you drift to sleep tonight, wrapped in blankets, safe in your room, invisible networks continue operating. Somewhere, someone watches and reports. Somewhere, secrets move from person to person. The ancient dance continues, but tonight, it continues without you. Tonight, you rest. Sweet dreams, traveller through time. May your sleep be deep and your morning bright. The shadows will keep their watch. They always have.